Hi everyone, so we're going to start today talking about population ecology. So our last unit was about ecosystem ecology, so that talked about all of the different biotic and abiotic factors or living and non-living factors within a given area. Our population ecology is going to focus mainly on a specific species in that area. So let's talk about how this is going to work. So there are a lot more insects than there are other animals on the planet. So these are going to be used as an example quite frequently as we go through this. So biodiversity is the first thing that we're going to talk about. And this describes a variety of life over all levels of ecological organization. So what that means is we're going to think about all the plants, animals, bacteria, etc., that are in a given area, and that's going to contribute to its biodiversity. I want you to remember that high biodiversity is actually very good for an area because that increase of life, that many different species that are found in those areas are going to allow many different life forms to be able to survive in those areas. So an example, if we have a lot of different types of plant species, those different types of plant species are going to be able to hold and carry many different animals in that area and increasing all of that biodiversity in a singular area. But when we talk about these, we're going to see there's three different types. So the first one is genetic diversity. So genetic diversity are differences in DNA among individuals. I'm going to add of the same species. Species diversity is going to be a variety of species in a given area. So if there's a lot of different plants, animals, all those different things. And then ecosystem diversity is a variety of habitats and ecosystems and communities in a given area. So if we take a look here at our three different pictures, ecosystem is probably our most broad. And if we look here, we can see the many different habitats. We have the water habitat, maybe some of this side forest area, mountain. Those are all going to be a variety of different habitats, ecosystems, and communities. If we move a little bit smaller, talking about one specific area, we can see there's many different types of species in this area, different trees, animals, bacteria, fungi, all of those are different species in this area. And if we get even smaller to genetic diversity, we can see that within our population of frogs, each one of these are going to have different DNA amongst those individuals. And this genetic diversity is really going to go hand in hand with evolution and all these different types of ideas that we'll get more into as we go on. But remember, genetic diversity, each individual is not exact copies of the next. So even humans, when you look around, we are all of the same species, but vastly different from each other because of our genetic diversity. So let's talk a little bit about classification. So classification is going to be talking about the differences between animals and how we're going to talk about those. So taxonomists are going to be those people who are classifying animals, and they're going to be classifying animals based on physical appearance and genetic makeup. And because of this, we see our hierarchy of taxonomic groups. So if we start here, species would be on top of this, but this is the most specific to the most general. So as we go up here, our domain is the most general, kingdom gets a little bit more specific, and each one gets more specific until we have the exact name of the organism that we're looking at. And a really important idea here is that these taxonomical groups reflect evolutionary relationships. So where you fall in this tree, say if you're next to, say us humans, we're next to, say, a monkey on the tree, that means we have very similar evolutionary backgrounds. And that's the same for any type of organism that fall next to each other in this evolutionary tree or phylogenetic tree. Another important thing here is that at the species level, we're going to see subspecies. So say if I have a fish in California rivers, and if we have the same species of fish on the East Coast, these populations are going to be pretty much the same, but their genetic characteristics might differ depending on that area. So in the California waters, there might be a genetic difference to say like warmer water, where in the East Coast you might see colder water. And that genetic difference, yes, it is of the same species, but there is a difference between the two areas there. Let's talk a little bit about this biodiversity distribution. So there are many, many types of animals and plants and bacteria, etc. on the planet. Some of these are really difficult to identify, these species, but it's also important to note that species are not going to be evenly distributed amongst the globe. So if we think back to our biomes project, the highest biodiversity that we saw was in the Amazon rainforest, and that's because they had the resources to carry that really high biodiversity. So we can see that it's not distributed globally. We're not going to see even distribution amongst the groups, our taxonomic groups, or within a geographical area. So all of those include, so if we think about the tundra, we're not going to see high biodiversity there. So as we look, more biodiversity increases towards our equator. So we're going to see a really heavily amount of our biodiversity in the lower areas, even more near the equator. So this is most of it, and then a lot of it you're going to see is falling right along this equator. So remember that that distribution is not even throughout the earth. So let's talk about some of the benefits here. So 3 different benefits here. One is going to be agriculture. So the benefit here is that taking wild strands of, say, corn and crossbreeding them, so having that relationship with crops that are already in a farm, can be really beneficial because it's transferring some different traits. So maybe for this example, maybe it's a resistant to bugs, maybe it's a resistant to disease in this case, but all of those crossbreeding, so putting more of that DNA to help, is going to be really beneficial to that biodiversity. In another way, we can also see that medicine is really important to this biodiversity, so organisms that contain compounds that are useful for treating disease. And a really great example of that is our yew tree. So it's an original source of Taxol, which is a cancer-fighting drug. We found that in a plant. So taking that information and bringing it into something else that is going to benefit other organisms. And then our last one is ecotourism, so that environmental pull to bring some tourism into certain areas is going to bring income for a lot of different nations. So those are 3 different benefits to this biodiversity and how it can create a more beneficial way. And let's talk about what a niche is. So a niche is a unique position occupied by a species in both terms of physical use of its habitat and function within a community. So niche and habitat are different, so it's important to note these differences. So an organism's habitat is kind of like a location, where a niche is kind of a pattern of the use of its habitat. So say you have an animal and its habitat, it needs water, food, and shade. Well, that would be its habitat. but the organism's niche is going to be how it's using those resources in that habitat. So that movement and how it can adapt to different situations. So remember, we can also think of it as adapting through a range of different conditions in which that species can survive. So the habitat really isn't changing that much, but it's how that organism is using that habitat. And there are sometimes niche specialists where they are restricted to the tolerance of these environmental changes, these environmental conditions. So if there's a large change in a certain environment, these organisms probably won't be able to survive as well, unlike a niche generalist, where they can tolerate a wide range for environmental conditions. So for this one, even if there is a large change, there's a possibility that the organism who lives in this niche is going to be able to adapt very easily to those changes. So let's take a look at this graph. Right here we can see our panda is going to be our specialist and our raccoon is going to be our generalist. So if we take a look at this area, our panda has a very small and narrow resource use. And the most is going to be here at the top. So it can fluctuate a little bit to the right and the left, but not much. Where if we take a look at our raccoon, we have a very large and wide curve here. So again, yes, this is going to be, the top is going to be the best where we see the most number of individuals, but it has a lot more wiggle room of how it can survive in each area. So generalist, again, wide range. We can see that within our graph. It's a very wide graph. And specialists can only tolerate a narrow range. And again, we can see that with our graph, very narrow for the panda here. So that's where we're going to end today. If you have any questions, please let me know.